And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I'm your host, Demo. It's time for another deck tech, and this is Ranar the Ever-Watchful. This was the very last guy I reviewed from the Kaldheim set, and you know, at first when you look at him, you're like, okay, the first card you foretell each turn, cost 0. So you're like, okay, he's a foretell tribal commander, which isn't very exciting because there's not that many foretell cards, especially if you're just talking about blue and white. But really that you get past that ability. And as I was reviewing this guy, I got more and more excited about the potential of a deck as I thought about all the ideas of what I could do with him. So whenever you exile one or more cards from your hand and or permanents from the battlefield, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. So the foretell thing is sort of just an add-on. Really what you're doing is sort of exile tribal here. There is a few different ways you could take this deck. You know, the fact that he's making 1/1 spirits is not insignificant as well. The important part to note here is you're exiling things from your hand, or you're exiling permanents from the battlefield, not your battlefield, right? It can be anywhere on the battlefield. So what we're going to do with this deck, we're going to do a combination of a few things. You know, that's what's great about this commander, I think, is that you can really just combine a whole bunch of ideas and it's all going to work great with him. So first things first, there's a couple cards that we just have to put in here because they came with the commander, you know, version of this deck. Ethereal Valkyrie and Hero of Bredegard. They're just, I think, you know, if Ethereal Valkyrie, I think, is just a great card. The idea that you can draw a card and then foretell something and it'll be cheaper to cast later. That's just fantastic. In general, I think that could go in any deck. That ability is just really, really good. I had this card in my top 20 cards of a Kaldheim because I just think that's an ability that could be used with anything. And then also Hero of Bredegard has essentially the exact same ability as our commander. You know, exiling one or more cards from your hand and or permanents from the battlefield, but instead of making spirit tokens, you're putting counters on them and they are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So just fantastic. Obviously both of those cards in this deck, so those are auto includes. The spirit thing we're going to do a little bit. You know, I didn't go that route too much. Drugskull Captain is obviously, I mean, Drugskull Captain is going to give our commander hexproof, so there's zero reason not. I mean, if I was making a Ranar deck and I wasn't going spirit tribal at all, I would still put this in here just because it gives our commander hexproof, right? So this is obvious include, and it's going to pump all of our other spirits. Supreme Phantom I also put in because it's going to pump all those spirits. You know, we do need to win the game at some point. I also liked Hanged Executioner in this deck. Okay, it is a spirit and it makes a spirit and it exiles, so it's doing everything we want to be doing, right? It's going to exile itself and it's going to exile another creature, so I think that's fantastic in this deck. I also threw Moorland Haunt in here. You know, exile a creature card from your graveyard to make a spirit token. Why not? I mean, it's there, we might as well put it in. And then of course we are going to want to play some foretell cards. I talked about Saw It Coming also in my top 20 cards. I think a lot of these foretell cards are very playable in Commander. You know, if you think about foretell cards, I really like the instants, right? Because the instants, you can just throw them in exile immediately and then just play them on the next turn, right? You don't have to wait till your next turn, just a later turn, which means your opponent's turn. You're going to be playing it on your opponent's turn anyway. So Saw It Coming really I'm pretty sure I'm going to put this in all of my blue decks and start replacing my negates and stuff like that. Mystic Reflection is another one that can go in any deck, just happens to be a foretell card. You know, we're just going to stick this in exile and just use it whenever the opportunity arises. Stoic Farmer, another card that I was really high on in my top 20. Just a great way to ramp in white. Also a foretell card, so it fits in this deck for a lot of reasons. And it's also got an ETB, which is going to be relevant. Glorious Protector. This has foretell. It also has an ETB. It also exiles stuff from the battlefield. So this guy's, again, it's going to be serving so many different purposes in this deck. I threw Force of Negation here. You know, I don't talk about the counter spells I'm using so much, but I wanted to point out the ability here it has. If it's not your turn, you may exile a blue card from your hand. So this is a good counter spell, you know, on its own, but you're going to exile a card from your hand. So this is gonna, if we use the alternate cost on this, it's gonna create a spirit token for us. So that is worth noting. Obviously Force of Will do the same. If again, I don't put Force of Will in my decks. I think it's one of those cards where I'm like, it sort of feels like a CEDH card, so I like to stay away from it. Just because, like Mana Crypt, it's one of those cards that when you play it in your casual commander deck, people kind of frown and they're like, is this guy actually playing a casual deck? I know that's just what I find, but you can throw it in there if you like. And then I do have a couple suspend cards, Ancestral Vision and Chronomatic Escape. Both of these guys are, we're going to exile them from our hand, so that's going to make us a spirit token, and they're just good cards. And Azor's Gateway, this is one that, this is one of the first cards I thought of while I was reviewing Ranar the first time. That phrase, exile a card from your hand, I immediately thought of it as Azor's Gateway. So this can be great because now we're going to draw a card and then exile a card from our hand, which is going to net us a spirit token. And also if we flip it, that's pretty good too. So like I said, there are several strategies in this deck. And one of the strategies we would be remiss not to do is blinking, right? Because we are exiling our creatures from the battlefield, which is going to make tokens. So Duplicant is going to be fantastic because, it's an ETB, a blinking creature, but also it's going to exile. So it's going to serve double duty. Amphin Mutineer is going to do the same. Cloud Blazer and Elite Guard Mage, both fantastic. Again, these are cards that you can just put in any deck. I can play a Cloud Blazer and never blink it. It's still going to be good. I still gain life, draw cards. Nothing wrong with that, right? Archaeomancer, same thing, right? This is a card that I'm just going to put in almost any of my blue decks just because it has a really good ability, and the fact that I can blink it just makes it so much better. Skyclave Apparition, this is a card that I've been putting in more and more decks. You're exiling a permanent, that's fantastic. You give your opponent a token, who cares, right? Like that in Commander, that's not really a big deal, right? And he's a spirit also, which plays a big part here. And then we can blink him. So he's fantastic in this deck. So again, he's got an ETB and he's exiling. Charming Prince, ETB, and also exiles. We can use him to blink other creatures, so that's going to be fantastic. And I finally found a deck to put Inquisitive Puppet in. I don't know why, and this is a silly one, and you don't have to you can replace this with something. For me, I've been waiting for a deck that Inquisitive Puppet works because it has such a bizarre ability, right? I think it's supposed to be Pinocchio because you're going to exile him. So while he's on the battlefield, you exile him to create a 1/1 human creature token. So I think the idea is I'm a real boy, right? It's a silly card, but I finally found a deck to put it in, and I am absolutely putting it in here, even though I could probably put something better. I don't care. It has an ETB, so it does have an ETB, Scry 1. No, not really anything super impressive, but Jimmy Crack Corn, and I don't care, because I'm putting it in here because we can exile it from the battlefield. I'm like, how do you, sacking this guy to make a 1/1 token, that you could definitely use, but the exile thing makes it difficult, right? Because you can't really get it back. But now I can exile my Inquisitive Puppet from the battlefield to create a 1/1 human creature token, and I also get a spirit token from my Ranar. Awesome. So let's start exiling stuff. Soul Herder, this is a no-brainer in this deck. Even without that blink ability, if you think about that ability, just that ability, we can even, if we have nothing to blink, we can just exile a spirit token. And what's going to happen is it's just going to make another spirit token. So we're just going to replace a spirit token we already have. And then it's also going to put a +1/+1 counter on Soul Herder, right? He's just going to sit there and get huge because we're going to be exiling stuff like crazy. I really like Gale Powder Mage. If you've watched my Livio and Sakashima deck tech, this is a similar, there are some similarities here, even though we are doing a lot less blinking in this deck. But Gale Powder Mage I really like because you can blink your own creatures with it, but you can also exile your opponent's creatures or blink them, which can sometimes be good. And if you think about something like a Skyclave Apparition or an Amphin Mutineer, right, we're giving our opponents these tokens that we can then exile with our Gale Powder Mage, and they're just gone forever. There's lots of other neat little tricks that you can do with it. Remember, we are just wanting to exile stuff. So repeating exile effect, right, is really what we're aiming for here. We don't want to fill this deck with a whole bunch of just blink spells. I do have momentary blink because I can flash it back, but that's it. Really what I want, because I didn't go too much into the blink strategy. I wanted repeatable blink effects, right? And Gale Powder Mage is a repeatable blink effect. Miss Meadow Witch is probably the best at this, right? Obviously, this isn't. It's going to be fantastic in this deck. Repeatable blink effects is what we want. Again, we can use it on ourselves. We can use it on our opponents if we want. It's going to be fantastic in this deck. But really, that's it. I don't have a lot of, I'm blinking my own creatures effects in this deck. There's just a few. I got Settle the Wreckage, though. That's going to be exiling things. This is a great card. I put it in all my mono white decks. Usually I put it in all my Azorius decks as well, because you just tend to stand back and get attacked a lot. I love Vanish into Memory. This is another card that is so versatile, and there's a lot of different ways you can use it. It can save your life. Your opponent's attacking you with a giant beater, you exile it. Okay, draw a bunch of cards, and then on your upkeep you'll discard a bunch, whatever. You loot through your deck, right? No big deal. But there's also lots of interesting ways you can manipulate it. Again, we can Amphin Mutineer and give our opponent a 4/3 Salamander token, and then we can exile it. And it won't come back because it's a token, and we'll just end up drawing 4 cards. So that's pretty fantastic. Because you can blink your own creatures with it, right? We can aim this at one of our own creatures. Use it to blink our own creatures. There's just so many ways you can use this card. I love it. I got Return to Dust. I got Crush Contraband. Again, just cards that are great. And this is why I think this commander is so great. When you have a commander that you can just do things that you would normally do anyway, and it's going to give you benefit, that seems so good to me. Aligned Hedron Network. Here's one that doesn't get used very much, but I've put it in a couple decks in the past. This is just great if you have any deck with a lot of small creatures. We could play a card like Dusk to Dawn or something like that, but I like this one because it's exiling, right? It's going to exile all the big fatties from the battlefield. We don't have any. With the exception of our Soul Herder and our Hero of Bredegard, which are going to be getting bigger and bigger and bigger, there's nothing in this deck that has a 5 or greater power. So this isn't even going to hurt us, and it's going to exile our opponent's big fatties, so it's going to be great. Raven Form from the new set. This card's ridiculous. Even in a white deck where I can exile artifacts and creatures relatively easily, this is still really good. Also has Foretell. I forgot to include it in my Foretell cards because I forgot it even had Foretell, which makes it even better in this deck. Release to the Wind, another card that sort of like Vanish into Memory, I just really love. It's super versatile. You can use it for a lot of things. It can save your life. It can blink your creatures. It can get you a free cast spell trigger if you want. You think about Ulamogs, for example. You can exile your own Ulamog and then cast it for free and get the exile triggers again. Some individual is playing a Winter Orb in a casual game. You can just cast this on their end step to get it off the battlefield temporarily, so all of your lands untap. There's just a lot of ways to use this card. You want to swing in for a big attack. You exile their Ghostly Prison temporarily. It's just a great, great card. I put Godsend in this deck because we're going to put this on our commander, right? So whenever a equipped creature blocks or becomes blocked by one of our creatures, you may exile one of those creatures. So it's going to be exiling stuff, okay? But the important part here is that Ranar is flying and vigilance. So he's flying and vigilance. We're going to put this on our Ranar. He's going to be a 5/6 flying vigilance. That means we can attack. So we can attack every single turn with him. If our opponents chump, we exile their creature and we get a spirit token. When our opponents attack us, we block with our Ranar because he has vigilance, and we exile that creature. It's going to keep us from getting attacked. I just think this is so good in this deck. Here's another card that I've been wanting to use in a deck and have now figured out the perfect deck for it. City of Shadows. This is the perfect card for this deck. I put this in some of my, aristocrat style decks where I have extra tokens. Like I think I had put this in my Farika deck temporarily because I can exile snake tokens and put counters on it. But it's not great because you're not sacrificing, you're exiling. It's perfect in this deck. I can exile a spirit token, and then I'm just going to get another spirit token. So it's just replacing itself, and I'm putting counters on my City of Shadows, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I love when I find a card that I've been wanting to use for a while that all of a sudden, this deck is perfect. Sweet. Surveyor's Scope. This is another card. I've been on the fence about this card for a long time. So, you're going to tap it. You search your library for up to X basic land cards, where X is the number of players who control at least 2 more lands than you. Put those cards onto the battlefield, right? So you put them directly on the battlefield. They're not tapped. So if you have 3 opponents with more lands than you, 2 or more lands, you get 3 lands into play. Untapped, that's pretty good. But you could end up getting nothing for this, and that's why I don't love it. This is a card, it's been around for a while. Nobody plays it. It's just, I think for a lot of people, it's too risky to maybe get nothing off of it. but it exiles. So now, see, I've found an excuse to put this in a deck and give it a try, because even if this gets us 0 lands, it's going to get us a spirit token because it exiles itself, right? We're exiling a permanent from the battlefield. So this is going to get us a spirit token at the very worst. So this is the perfect deck to give it a shot in. Fairy Artisans. This is another card. It's just good in this deck. You know, it's just a good card in general, but whenever you create, you know, you're going to create a token copy of a creature, and then you're going to exile any other tokens, right? You're going to exile those tokens when something else is cast. So this is a card that every single time our opponents cast a creature, we're going to be getting a spirit token, essentially, because we're going to be getting that token creature and it's going to exile the other ones. And that is us exiling something from the battlefield. So we get that effect. Salt Skitter, another really goofy. Nobody has seen this card before, I'm sure. It is essentially Norrin, right? This is sort of like Norrin, what people do with Norrin, right? Where they have a Perforos and they'll just blink their Norrin a lot and then deal tons of, like, Perforos is essentially the best card in that deck. This is going to be similar, where it is a scaredy cat, essentially, right? Whenever another creature comes into play, any creature, opponent's creatures, our creatures, you're going to essentially blink the Salt Skitter. So Salt Skitter, we're just going to cast it and it's just going to sit there, and it's going to be like a Norrin, and it's just going to be blinked, constantly blinking, 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 and we're going to be making tons of spirit tokens with it. And then Mirror Mockery, another card that, you know, you can put this in a lot of blink decks because you put it on your Cloud Blazer, for example, and then your Cloud Blazer attacks, you create a token, you get to gain the life and draw the cards, which is great. But then also you exile the token at the end of combat. So we're going to get that exile trigger. The fact that Ranar allows you to get something out of exiling tokens, man, that really makes it good. I mean, there's just a lot of different ways you could go with this. You could go just straight removal because there's so many exile effects in white especially, but also in blue. You know, if you think about Reality Shift and Curse of the Swine, cards that I always play in my blue decks, we have them in here. I normally wouldn't play these in a white-blue deck because white is already great at exiling stuff, but why not? You know, we want to be exiling stuff, so why not? Winds of Abandon, again, same thing. It's so much exile that we're going to be just creating spirit tokens like crazy. So this deck, I think, is going to be great. I'm really looking forward to playing it, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Thanks for tuning in.